Dr. Rachel Bennett wiped the condensation from the submersible's tiny window and stared at the sonar display for the 100th time. The reading had to be wrong. Just had to be. 3,000 meters below the surface of the Pacific Ocean, in one of the deepest parts of the Mariana Trench, her equipment was showing something that made absolutely no sense. "Boss, I'm telling you that's not a geological formation," Tommy Rodriguez said from the pilot's seat. His weathered hands adjusted the external lights, trying to get a better view through the murky darkness. Tommy had been piloting deep-sea vessels for 20 years, and Rachel had learned to trust his instincts. Rachel had dedicated 15 years of her life to ocean archaeology. She'd explored sunken Spanish galleons off the coast of Florida, mapped ancient trade routes in the Mediterranean, and even discovered evidence of prehistoric coastal cities that had been swallowed by rising seas thousands of years ago. She'd seen plenty of strange things on the ocean floor. But this was something else entirely. The descent had taken them 40 agonizing minutes, sinking slowly through layers of absolute darkness where no sunlight had ever reached. With every meter they dropped deeper, Rachel felt her heart beating faster in her chest. She tried to stay calm, tried to maintain her scientific objectivity, but the anticipation was killing her. Sitting beside her in the cramped passenger compartment was Brandon Hayes, a young engineer fresh out of graduate school. This was only his third deep-sea expedition, and he kept checking and rechecking their equipment with nervous energy. Behind them, Dr. Helen Crawford remained perfectly still and silent. Helen was a veteran oceanographer who'd spent more time underwater than most people spent in their own homes. Her weathered, sun-damaged face rarely showed emotion anymore, but Rachel noticed her eyes were fixed intently on the viewing screen. When the submersible's powerful lights finally illuminated their target, Rachel actually gasped out loud. The structure stretched beyond the range of their lights in every direction. The hull was made of some kind of crystalline metal that Rachel had never seen before. It seemed to absorb their lights and then reflect them back in colors that shouldn't exist, hues that made her eyes water when she tried to focus on them. There was no rust anywhere. No degradation. No barnacles or coral growth. Nothing. The surface looked as pristine as if it had been built yesterday, not buried under ocean sediment for God knows how long. But it was the patterns carved into the hull that made Rachel's hands start trembling. Geometric designs of such perfect precision that they looked machine-made, except no human machine could create such intricate complexity. The mathematics involved were beyond anything she'd ever studied. "Those symbols," Brandon whispered, his voice cracking slightly. "Are they moving?" Rachel leaned closer to the window. He was right. In the beam of their submersible's lights, the etchings seemed to shift and flow like living things, like they were responding to being observed. She blinked hard, wondering if the pressure was affecting her vision, but no. The symbols were definitely moving. "This predates any known human civilization," Helen said quietly from the back seat. It was the first time she'd spoken in over an hour. "We're looking at something that's thousands of years old. Maybe tens of thousands. Maybe more." Rachel grabbed her camera and started photographing everything, her scientific training fighting against the pure wonder that was flooding through her body. This was it. This was the discovery that would change everything humanity thought it knew about its place in the universe. Proof that we weren't alone. Proof that someone else had been here long before us. "Dr. Bennett," Tommy called out urgently. "You really need to see this right now." Rachel tore her eyes away from the symbols and looked where Tommy was pointing. The vessel's main entrance, a massive oval portal that they'd assumed was permanently sealed shut, was beginning to open. But it wasn't grinding open mechanically like a door with ancient rusted hinges. It was dilating smoothly, like a living eye responding to light, like the ship itself was aware of their presence. A pulse of bioluminescent energy suddenly burst from the opening. The wave of light washed over their submersible, and every instrument inside went completely haywire. Screens flickered with static. Alarms started blaring. The lights dimmed and surged. Brandon frantically worked the controls, trying to stabilize their systems, while Tommy fought to maintain their position in the water. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything stabilized. The instruments returned to normal. The alarms fell silent. But inside the alien ship, something had awakened. Lights were powering on throughout the vessel. Rachel watched in stunned silence as row after row of illumination spread through corridors and chambers that shouldn't exist, activating in sequence like someone was flipping switches. The ship was coming to life after sleeping for an eternity at the bottom of the ocean. "It's still active," Brandon breathed, his face pale in the reflected glow. "After all this time, after thousands of years underwater, something inside that thing is still functioning." Rachel pressed her hand against the cold glass of the viewing window, staring into that massive glowing entrance. The ship had opened specifically for them. Not for the dozens of other expeditions that had passed over this location throughout human history. Not for the whales or the submarines or the research vessels. For them. For this moment. Right now. Her reflection stared back at her from the window, ghostly and uncertain. Her mind raced with questions. Who built this? When? Why was it here, hidden in the deepest part of the ocean? And what was waiting inside? Tommy's voice broke through her thoughts. Dr. Bennett, we need to make a decision. Our air supply gives us about 6 more hours down here. Command is asking if we want to return to the surface and wait for reinforcements. Rachel couldn't tear her eyes away from that glowing portal. Every instinct she had as a scientist screamed that they needed to be careful, to follow protocol, to wait for proper authorization and backup teams. But another part of her, the part that had dreamed of making discoveries like this since she was a little girl, knew that they might never get another chance. Whatever was inside that ship had been waiting for millions of years. It had opened its doors for them. And Rachel Bennett was absolutely certain that once she reported this discovery, the military would lock down this entire area. Politicians would fight over jurisdiction. Corporations would battle for salvage rights. She'd lose access to the greatest archaeological find in human history. The choice seemed obvious even if it terrified her. We're going inside, Rachel said firmly. Prepare for docking procedures. The argument inside the cramped submersible lasted nearly 20 minutes, and voices were getting louder with each passing second. Absolutely not, Helen said, her voice carrying the sharp edge of someone who'd seen too many colleagues die from reckless decisions. Rachel, we don't have authorization for this. This isn't some sunken pirate ship we're talking about. We have absolutely no idea what we're dealing with here. Rachel turned in her seat to face the older scientist. Helen, you know exactly what's going to happen when we surface. By tomorrow morning, this entire area will be swarming with military vessels. Government submarines will be crawling all over this site. We'll be locked out of our own discovery. Brandon pulled up the external camera feeds on his tablet, his fingers moving quickly across the screen. Dr. Crawford, she's got a point. I'm already picking up encrypted communications on the military frequencies. 3 government submarines are changing course toward our position. We've got maybe 6 hours before this place turns into a restricted zone. Helen's jaw clenched tight, and Rachel could see the internal battle playing out behind her eyes. Finally, the older woman gave a single sharp nod. Fine. But we follow strict protocol. 2 hours inside maximum. At the first sign of anything dangerous, anything at all, we evacuate immediately. No arguments. Understood. Understood, Rachel agreed, though her heart was pounding with excitement. Tommy maneuvered the submersible toward the entrance using the magnetic anchors. As they approached, something remarkable happened. The airlock began pressurizing itself without anyone touching a single control. The ship was actively helping them enter like it wanted them inside. That's not normal, Tommy muttered. That's really not normal. When the airlock finally opened and they stepped through into the ship's interior, Rachel's mind struggled to process what she was seeing. The laws of physics seemed to have taken a vacation in this place. She found herself standing in a corridor that stretched impossibly far into the distance. According to their external measurements, the corridor she was looking at should extend well beyond the physical boundaries of the ship itself. It was like standing inside something that was bigger on the inside than the outside, which made absolutely no sense. The walls glowed with a soft, pleasant light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Flowing script covered every surface, constantly updating and changing like a living computer screen. Star maps materialized and dissolved, showing constellations Rachel had never seen before. The gravity felt strange too, not quite pulling in the direction her body expected, making her feel slightly dizzy and disoriented. According to my measurements, this hallway is 3 times longer than the entire ship, Brandon said, checking his handheld scanner 3 separate times as if refusing to believe his own readings. That's impossible. That absolutely cannot be real. But it was real. They were standing in it. They walked for what felt like 15 minutes, though Rachel's sense of time had become unreliable in this bizarre environment. Eventually, they found what could only be described as a bridge or command center. The chamber was absolutely massive, with ceilings that soared at least 30 feet overhead. Everything was designed for beings much larger than humans, creatures that must have stood at least 12 feet tall. Control interfaces lined the curved walls, but they weren't buttons or screens like human technology. Instead, holographic displays floated in the air, activating and brightening as Rachel approached them. It was like the ship recognized her as a living being and was responding to her presence. It's responding directly to you, Helen observed, keeping a careful distance from the displays. Whatever this technology is, it seems to recognize human biology somehow. It knows we're here. Brandon knelt down beside one of the central consoles, examining some kind of residue or stain on the floor. He pulled out a small scanner and ran it over the material. The device immediately started beeping frantically, the readings spiking into the red zone. What is it? Rachel asked, moving closer. This organic matter contains human DNA markers, Brandon said slowly, his face going pale as he read the results a second time to make sure. But that's impossible because this residue is thousands of years old. The scanner is saying this material has been here for at least 10,000 years, maybe longer. Could it be contamination from us? Rachel suggested, though she already knew the answer. Brandon shook his head firmly. No way. This predates us by millennia. But the DNA is definitely human adjacent. Which means someone like us was inside this ship a very, very long time ago. A deep thrumming sound suddenly filled the entire chamber, vibrating through the floor and into Rachel's bones. Throughout the ship, systems were powering up in sequence. Lights bloomed in corridors they hadn't yet explored, spreading outward in waves like a city coming alive after a blackout. The central display screen activated with a brilliant flash, showing a countdown rendered in mathematical symbols that Rachel could somehow understand despite never having seen them before. 6 hours. The ship was counting down to something that would happen in exactly 6 hours. We need to leave right now, Helen said firmly, her voice brooking no argument. Rachel, we're out of our depth here. This is beyond anything we're equipped to handle. But Rachel wasn't listening anymore. She was staring at the center console where a genetic scanner had suddenly illuminated, bathing the area in soft blue light. Above it, a hologram flickered and stuttered like an old video trying to play but frozen on the first frame. Waiting. Patient. Ancient beyond measure. It wants human DNA, Brandon whispered, his voice filled with awe and terror in equal measure. The ship has been waiting for someone like us to activate this message. It's been waiting here at the bottom of the ocean for thousands of years, just waiting for humans to find it and unlock whatever's stored in that hologram. The hologram pulsed gently, casting dancing shadows across the oversized control panels. Whatever message it contained had been recorded an unimaginable time ago, preserved perfectly, waiting for this exact moment. Rachel found herself reaching toward the scanner, her hand moving almost of its own accord. Every scientific bone in her body was screaming at her to stop, to think, to consider the consequences. But the answer to humanity's greatest question was right there, literally within reach. Rachel, don't, Helen warned sharply. We have no idea what that will do. Could be dangerous. It could trigger something we can't control. The countdown continued ticking downward on the main display. 6 hours until activation. 6 hours until something happened that would change everything. But activation of what? And why now, after all this time? Rachel's hand hovered inches above the scanner, trembling slightly. She could feel the warmth radiating from it, could sense that it was designed specifically for this purpose. To be touched. To be activated. To deliver its message to whoever was brave enough or foolish enough to accept it. Above them, faintly audible through the thick hull of the alien vessel, she could hear the subtle vibrations of other submarines arriving. Military vessels deploying their equipment. Governments scrambling to claim jurisdiction over the discovery. Time was running out in more ways than one. If I don't do this now, we might never get another chance, Rachel said quietly. This message has been waiting for us. For humanity. I can feel it. Helen grabbed Rachel's shoulder, her grip surprisingly strong. And what if that message is a warning? What if we're not supposed to open it? What if there's a reason it's been locked away down here? But Rachel had already made her choice. Her palm pressed firmly against the scanner, and the ship responded instantly. The moment Rachel's hand made contact with the scanner, the entire bridge erupted in blinding light. She stumbled backward, shielding her eyes as the hologram solidified into something far more detailed and terrifying than she'd imagined. The figure standing before them was humanoid in basic shape, but that's where the similarities to humans ended. The being was tall, impossibly tall, with elongated limbs that seemed almost fragile despite their obvious strength. Its skin had a translucent quality, like looking through frosted glass at something moving underneath. But it was the eyes that caught Rachel's attention and held it. Those eyes contained depths of sadness so profound that just looking at them made her chest ache with a grief that wasn't her own. When the creature spoke, no sound came from its mouth. Instead, the words appeared directly inside Rachel's mind, translating themselves into perfect English as if they'd always been there. Brandon gasped beside her, and she realized he was hearing it too. They all were. "We are the architects," the being said, its mental voice carrying the weight of ages. "And we are already gone." The hologram shifted and expanded, filling the entire chamber with images that moved and flowed like memories. Rachel, Helen, and Brandon stood frozen as billions of years of history unfolded before their eyes. It was almost too much information to process, but somehow their minds adapted, accepting the impossible download of knowledge. The architects had come to Earth long before the dinosaurs, before complex life had even begun crawling from the oceans. They hadn't come as conquerors or colonizers. They'd come as gardeners, carefully seeding the planet with the precise chemical and biological conditions that would eventually lead to humanity's evolution. They'd built ships like this one and scattered them across Earth's oceans, creating a network of ark vessels that would monitor and guide development across countless millennia. But why? Rachel whispered aloud, her voice barely audible. Why go to all that trouble for a species that didn't even exist yet? The hologram seemed to hear her question because it shifted again, showing something that made Rachel's blood run cold. Star systems across the galaxy were being consumed by darkness. Not just destroyed but erased as if they'd never existed at all. Entire civilizations vanishing without a trace, their histories deleted from the fabric of reality itself. The architects called them the Devourers. An enemy unlike anything Rachel could comprehend. These weren't invaders who wanted resources or territory. They were something far worse. They consumed potential itself, erasing not just what a civilization had accomplished but what it could ever accomplish in the future. They deleted possibilities from existence. The architects had been powerful beyond imagination. Their technology made human science look like children playing with sticks. They'd mastered faster-than-light travel, could manipulate matter at the quantum level, and had lifespans measured in thousands of years. But for all their brilliance, they had one fatal weakness. They were rigid in their thinking, unable to adapt when confronted with problems that didn't fit their existing understanding of the universe. When the Devourers came, the architects tried to fight using logic and reason and mathematical precision. But the Devourers operated on principles the architects couldn't understand. Every strategy failed. Every defense crumbled. Slowly, inexorably, the architects' vast civilization began to die. So they ran away? Brandon asked, his voice shaking. They came to Earth to hide? The hologram's expression showed something that might have been a sad smile. No. We came to Earth to plant a seed. A seed of hope in soil we would never see bloom. The images shifted again, showing the architects' desperate final solution. They couldn't save themselves, but maybe they could save something. They took their genetic legacy, the core patterns of what made them who they were, and scattered it across hundreds of promising worlds throughout the galaxy. Not to create copies of themselves but to create something entirely new. Something unpredictable. Something that might evolve traits the architects themselves had never possessed. You weren't chosen because you were special, the architect's hologram explained, its mental voice gentle but firm. You were chosen because you had potential we couldn't predict or control. Humanity evolved in ways we never imagined possible, developing characteristics we never had. Your chaos, your unpredictability, your ability to believe in things that seem impossible, these are traits we spent 1,000,000 years trying to cultivate in ourselves and failed. Rachel felt tears streaming down her face, though she wasn't entirely sure why she was crying. The hologram was showing the architects' final days now. Their civilization wasn't destroyed in some dramatic final battle. Instead, they simply accepted their fate with quiet dignity. They chose extinction willingly, pouring every remaining resource into creating these ark ships and seeding worlds like Earth. They died so that humanity might live. They sacrificed everything for species they would never meet, for civilizations that wouldn't exist for billions of years after their last member passed away. The countdown you see isn't an activation sequence, the architect said. It's a test. A test that you must pass to inherit what we've left behind. Helen grabbed Rachel's arm hard enough to hurt. We need to surface immediately. We need to report this to world leaders, to the United Nations, to scientists who can verify what we're seeing. This is too big for just us. There's no time for that, Brandon interrupted, frantically pointing at the external monitors. The screens showed at least a dozen military submarines surrounding their position on the ocean floor above them. Encrypted communications were flying back and forth between them. Demands for immediate evacuation were crackling through their radio, though the alien ship seemed to be blocking most of the transmissions. The hologram's face showed an expression of profound sadness. The test begins now. 3 trials are scattered throughout this vessel. But you must understand something crucial. These trials don't measure intelligence or physical strength or technological knowledge. They measure the one quality we architects lacked completely. The trait that doomed our entire species to extinction. Around them, the bridge began sealing itself off. Sections of the ship were closing with gentle finality, like a building locking its doors for the night. The 3 pathways illuminated throughout the vessel, each one glowing with soft, inviting light. If you fail these trials, this ship will sink to depths beyond any human retrieval, the architect warned. It will carry our legacy down to Earth's molten core, where it will be destroyed forever. But if you succeed... The hologram flickered, its image becoming unstable. If you succeed, you'll understand why we chose to die. You'll understand what made our extinction necessary for your existence. The image began to fade, breaking apart into particles of light that dissolved into the air. But before it disappeared completely, the architect added one final message. We failed because we were alone. We failed because we believed we had to be perfect. We failed because we couldn't trust in anything we couldn't control or predict. Don't make our mistakes. Remember that chaos can be beautiful. Remember that imperfection can be strength. Then the hologram was gone, and the 3 of them stood in the silent bridge, staring at the 3 glowing pathways that led deeper into the ship. Rachel looked at her companions. Helen's face was set in grim determination, while Brandon looked terrified but resolute. Above them, through the layers of ocean and metal, military forces were preparing for forced extraction. They had maybe 4 hours before armored submarines breached the hull and dragged them out. The trials waited. The future of humanity balanced on whatever the architects had deemed most important. 3 tests designed by a dying civilization, given to a species that didn't even exist when they were created. We split up, Rachel said finally. 3 trials, 3 of us. It's the only way we finish this in time. Helen met Rachel's eyes. Despite everything, despite the fear and the impossibility of their situation, the older scientist managed a small smile. Whatever happens in there, whatever we face, we see this through to the end. Together. They each chose a pathway and stepped forward into the unknown. Brandon stepped through his chosen pathway and found himself in a chamber that seemed to breathe. The walls pulsed gently, expanding and contracting like living lungs, and the floor beneath his feet had a strange organic texture that made him deeply uncomfortable. He'd barely taken 3 steps when the first puzzle materialized in front of him, floating in the air like a hologram made of solid light. It was a geometric problem, shapes and angles that twisted in dimensions his eyes couldn't quite follow. Brandon had graduated top of his class at MIT. He'd solved complex engineering problems that had stumped professors twice his age. This should be easy for him. He reached out and touched the floating shapes, manipulating them with his fingers. The puzzle responded to his movements, pieces sliding into new configurations. For the first few minutes he felt confident. He was good at this. This was what he did. But then something strange happened. Every time he solved one aspect of the puzzle, 3 more problems appeared in its place. The complexity wasn't just increasing, it was multiplying exponentially. Within 10 minutes, Brandon was staring at a mathematical nightmare that made his graduate thesis look like elementary school homework. His hands started shaking. Sweat dripped down his forehead. He tried different approaches, used every problem-solving technique he'd ever learned, but nothing worked. The puzzle kept growing, kept becoming more impossible. Then the chamber changed. The walls began displaying images of failure. He saw the alien ship sealing itself forever, sinking deeper into the ocean's abyss where no one would ever find it. He saw humanity losing this chance at advancement, saw the knowledge of the architects vanishing because Brandon Hayes wasn't smart enough to solve a simple puzzle. I can do this, he muttered to himself, attacking the problem with renewed desperation. I just need to think harder. I just need to be smarter. But he wasn't smart enough. That was becoming horrifyingly clear. For the first time in his entire life, Brandon had encountered a problem he genuinely couldn't solve, no matter how hard he tried. His vision blurred with tears of frustration. He'd always been the brilliant one, the genius, the person everyone turned to when they needed impossible problems solved. That's who Brandon Hayes was. Without that identity, who was he? Then, through his panic, he noticed something. A small interface glowing softly in the corner of the chamber. A help function. A button that would break the problem down into smaller pieces, that would show him how to approach it collaboratively, step by step. But asking for help meant admitting he couldn't do it alone. It meant acknowledging that he wasn't as smart as he'd always believed. It meant failure. Brandon stared at that button for a full minute, his pride warring with his desperation. Finally, with tears streaming down his face, he pressed it. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The ship didn't judge him or mock him. Instead, it showed him how the architects had faced this exact same problem. It showed him a civilization of brilliant beings who had refused to ask for help until it was far too late, who had believed their intelligence made them superior and self-sufficient. It showed him how that pride had killed them all. The puzzle began breaking down into manageable pieces. Not because Brandon had suddenly gotten smarter, but because he'd finally learned that collaboration wasn't weakness. The trial dissolved around him, and he felt a profound sense of relief mixed with shame. He'd passed, but only by admitting his own limitations. Helen's trial was completely different. She found herself standing in a massive chamber that displayed the architects' final days in heartbreaking detail. She watched their civilization crumble, watched families say goodbye to each other, watched an entire species accept extinction with quiet grace. Then the chamber presented her with a choice, manifesting as two glowing pathways in front of her. The first pathway showed her saving the architects. She could reverse their fate, could give them a second chance at survival. All it would cost was humanity's future. The knowledge and potential the architects had seeded on Earth would be redirected back to saving them instead. The second pathway showed her choosing humanity's uncertain future over the architects' certain salvation. It meant letting these noble beings stay dead, letting their sacrifice stand. Helen stood frozen between the two choices, her mind racing. She thought about Dr. James Martinez, her colleague who had died 5 years ago exploring a deep-sea volcanic vent. James had been overconfident, had ignored warning signs because he believed he knew better than everyone else. His arrogance had killed him, and Helen had carried the guilt of not stopping him ever since. That experience had taught her to be cautious, to be afraid, to always consider the worst-case scenario. Fear had kept her alive where boldness had killed James. But looking at the architects' faces in the holographic display, seeing their willingness to die for species they'd never meet, Helen suddenly understood something she'd been too afraid to accept. True courage wasn't the absence of fear. It wasn't being reckless or overconfident like James had been. True courage was choosing hope despite having every logical reason to choose despair. It was looking at impossible odds and deciding to believe in possibility anyway. The architects had made the hardest choice imaginable. They'd chosen to die so that others might live. They'd chosen uncertainty and hope over safety and certainty. Helen took a deep breath and walked down the second pathway, choosing humanity's future over the architect's past. As she did, she felt the weight of James's death lift slightly from her shoulders. His death had taught her caution, but it shouldn't have taught her to stop believing in hope. The simulation faded around her. The architects' faces showed something that looked like approval before dissolving into particles of light. Helen had passed by choosing the harder path, the uncertain path, the path that required faith instead of guarantees. Rachel's trial was the strangest of all. She stepped into a room filled with mirrors that stretched infinitely in every direction. But these weren't normal mirrors. Each reflection showed a different version of Earth, a different timeline where humanity had evolved differently. In one mirror, humans had become warlords, conquering and destroying everything in their path. In another, they were saints, so focused on peace that they'd been wiped out by the first predator species they encountered. Some mirrors showed humanity transcending into beings of pure energy. Others showed extinction events, nuclear wars, pandemics that left Earth empty and silent. A voice echoed through the chamber, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. Choose what makes your humanity worth saving. Rachel walked between the mirrors, studying each version of human history. She saw the Crusades and the Renaissance. She saw the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and she saw the first human footprints on the moon. She witnessed slavery and civil rights movements, genocides and humanitarian aid, the absolute worst and the absolute best that humanity had to offer. What made humans special? Their intelligence? She saw dozens of mirrors showing brilliant humans who'd used that intelligence to create weapons of mass destruction. Their compassion? Other mirrors showed kind-hearted humans whose compassion had been exploited by those with darker intentions. Rachel spun slowly, overwhelmed by the infinite possibilities. Then she stopped, really seeing the pattern for the first time. In every single mirror, in every version of humanity across every timeline, one thing remained constant. Humans were contradictions. They were simultaneously capable of incredible cruelty and overwhelming kindness. They were brilliant and foolish, brave and cowardly, selfless and selfish, often all at the same time, sometimes within the same person. The architects had been perfect in their own way. Perfect, precise, logical, and completely rigid. That perfection had made them unable to adapt when faced with something beyond their understanding. Humanity was gloriously, beautifully, messily imperfect. And that imperfection, that chaos, that ability to hold completely contradictory traits and somehow make them work together, that was humanity's true strength. Rachel reached out and touched the mirror showing her own Earth. The real Earth. Flawed and struggling, making terrible mistakes and learning from them, falling down and getting back up, destroying and creating in equal measure. We're worth saving because we're not perfect, Rachel said aloud. We're worth saving because we can change. The mirrors shattered into countless particles of light that swirled around her like a galaxy being born. She'd passed the final trial. Rachel, Brandon, and Helen reconvened on the bridge exactly as the countdown hit 0. They were all breathing hard, looking exhausted and emotionally drained, but there was something different in their eyes now. Something had fundamentally changed inside each of them during those trials. The moment they stepped back into the central chamber, the ship responded. The entire bridge lit up like a Christmas tree, every system activating simultaneously. Holographic displays erupted from every surface, showing a network of connections spreading across the entire planet. Rachel realized with a jolt that this wasn't just one ship. There were dozens of these vessels hidden in Earth's oceans, all connected, all waiting to be activated. The architect's hologram materialized one final time, but it looked different now. Less sad. Almost hopeful. You have passed the trials, it said, its mental voice resonating in all their minds. You have demonstrated the qualities we lacked. Humility. Hope. Acceptance of imperfection. The knowledge of our civilization is now yours to claim. Images flooded the displays around them. Medical technology that could cure diseases humanity had fought for centuries. Clean energy systems that could power entire cities without pollution. Faster-than-light propulsion systems. Artificial intelligence that could help solve climate change. Manufacturing techniques that could end poverty. The accumulated knowledge of a civilization millions of years more advanced than humanity, all of it available at the touch of a button. Brandon's hands were literally shaking as he looked at the engineering schematics. This is incredible. This is beyond anything I even dreamed was possible. But then the hologram's expression changed, becoming serious once more. However, you must understand the cost. Accepting this knowledge will activate a beacon. A signal that will broadcast Earth's location across the entire galaxy. Every civilization within 1,000 light years will know you exist. You will no longer be hidden. Some will come as friends. Others will come as conquerors. And some may come as something far worse. The weight of those words hit Rachel like a physical blow. The hologram was offering humanity a devil's bargain. Accept unimaginable advancement but lose the safety of anonymity. Announce yourself to a galaxy that might not be friendly. Helen stepped forward, her face pale. Who decides something like this? This affects every human being on the planet. We can't make this choice for 8 billion people. Rachel looked at the activation panel, then at the monitors showing military submarines surrounding their position. Encrypted demands for evacuation were still flooding their communications. Within hours, maybe minutes, armed forces would breach the hull and drag them out. Some government or corporation would claim the ship, lock it away, study it in secret for decades. That's when it hit her. The architects hadn't just been testing their individual qualities. They'd been testing whether humanity had learned the most important lesson of all. You're right, Helen, Rachel said suddenly. We can't make this decision alone. And we're not going to. Brandon looked at her like she'd lost her mind. What are you talking about? We have maybe an hour before we're forcibly extracted. Rachel was already moving to the communications console, her fingers flying over the holographic controls. The ship responded to her touch, and she felt a surge of understanding flow into her mind. She knew how to use this technology now, like the knowledge had always been there waiting for her to access it. I'm patching us through to the surface, she said. Not to military channels. To civilian networks. Every news station, every social media platform, every communication satellite in range. Within seconds, Rachel had hijacked virtually every broadcast signal on the planet. Her face appeared on television screens in New York and Tokyo, on phone screens in Mumbai and Lagos, on computer monitors in Sao Paulo and Sydney. The question she posed was simple and direct. My name is Dr. Rachel Bennett, and I'm speaking to you from inside an alien ship at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. We've been offered a choice that will affect every single person on Earth. Should humanity accept advanced alien technology and announce our existence to the galaxy, knowing that some who hear our signal might come to destroy us? Or should we stay hidden and keep struggling with the problems we have now? You have 40 minutes to decide. The choice belongs to all of us. The response was instantaneous and overwhelming. Social media absolutely exploded. News organizations scrambled to verify the transmission. Government officials demanded the broadcast be shut down, but Rachel had routed it through so many systems that cutting it off would require shutting down half the communication satellites orbiting Earth. And people started talking. Millions of conversations erupting simultaneously across every platform in every language. Some people were terrified, demanding humanity stay hidden and safe. Others were angry that the decision was even being questioned, insisting that fear was no way to live. Scientists debated the implications. Religious leaders offered prayers and guidance. Ordinary people shared their hopes and fears with strangers across the world. Helen watched the global conversation unfold on the monitors, shaking her head in disbelief. This is complete chaos. We can't make decisions this important through social media arguments and online polls. We're not making the decision through chaos, Rachel replied quietly. We're making it through conversation. Through millions of people sharing their perspectives. The architects made every decision in isolation, with perfect logic and zero input from anyone who might disagree. Look where that got them. The debate raged for 35 minutes. Military commanders were screaming threats through every channel. World leaders demanded Rachel shut down the broadcast immediately. But something remarkable was happening beneath all the noise and anger. A consensus was forming. Not unanimous, nothing involving 8 billion humans could ever be unanimous. But a clear pattern was emerging from the beautiful, chaotic mess of human discussion. Humanity chose to announce itself to the galaxy. Not because they were arrogant or naive. Not because they didn't understand the risks. But because hiding in fear wasn't really living. Because the architects had given everything to offer humanity this chance, and refusing it would make that sacrifice meaningless. Because hope, even uncertain hope, was better than guaranteed stagnation. Rachel's hand moved toward the activation panel. Are we really doing this? Brandon nodded, his earlier fear replaced by determination. The architects believed in us enough to die for us. I think we owe it to them to believe in ourselves. Helen took a deep breath and placed her weathered hand on Rachel's shoulder. For what it's worth, I think they chose the right species to bet on. Rachel activated the network. The response was immediate and extraordinary. Knowledge flooded into human databases worldwide, uploading into research centers, universities, hospitals, and laboratories across the planet. In Geneva, medical researchers suddenly understood the genetic mechanisms behind diseases that had killed millions. In Mumbai, engineers grasped clean energy principles that could replace fossil fuels entirely. In Beijing, climate scientists received atmospheric data that showed exactly how to reverse environmental damage. But the ship had saved one final revelation, one last gift the architects had left behind. The hologram showed Earth from space, but now certain areas were highlighted and glowing. Not just where humans lived, but scattered across the oceans and forests and even the skies. Dolphins glowed with the same energy signature. So did octopi and crows and elephants and whales. Even some species of trees showed the telltale markers. The architect's genetic legacy wasn't placed only in humanity, the hologram explained. Earth carries dozens of inheritor species, each with different evolutionary paths and different potential. Humanity was never meant to dominate your world alone. You were meant to share it with other intelligences who might develop in ways you never could. Brandon started laughing, the sound edged with hysteria and wonder. We're not alone. We've never been alone, not even on our own planet. The alien ship began to rise. Rachel felt the movement through the floor as ancient systems, more powerful than anything humans had ever created, lifted the massive vessel from 3,000 meters of crushing depth. It rose steadily, unstoppably, carrying them toward the surface. As the ship broke through the waves into sunlight for the first time in millennia, its crystalline hull blazed with light. The beacon activated, broadcasting a signal that would ripple across the galaxy at faster-than-light speeds. Within hours, civilizations thousands of light-years away would know that Earth existed, that humanity had awakened, that a new voice had joined the cosmic conversation. Some of those civilizations would receive the signal as welcome news. Others would hear it as a threat. Some might come as teachers, others as conquerors. The galaxy would know humanity existed now, with all the danger and promise that knowledge carried. 6 months later, Rachel stood on the deck of the Interspecies Institute, a massive floating research platform that had been constructed around the risen alien ship. The vessel served as both monument and laboratory now, its secrets being carefully studied and shared with researchers from every nation on Earth. But the really amazing work was happening in the laboratories surrounding it. Human linguists worked alongside marine biologists trying to establish communication with dolphins whose intelligence had been dramatically enhanced by activation of their dormant genetic code. Engineers collaborated with behavioral scientists studying crows who could now solve complex mechanical problems that had stumped humans for years. The other architect vessels had risen from oceans around the world, each one revealing different aspects of the ancient civilization's knowledge. Helen approached carrying a tablet filled with data from the deep space monitoring stations humanity had rapidly constructed in the outer solar system. "We've detected 5 distinct signals so far," she said, her voice carefully neutral. 3 appear to be exploratory in nature, just checking us out. 1 seems genuinely friendly, some kind of welcome message. But the 5th one. She hesitated. The 5th signal is definitely military in nature. We're analyzing it now, but initial estimates suggest we have maybe a year, possibly less, before someone arrives who might not have friendly intentions. Rachel nodded slowly, feeling the weight of that knowledge but not collapsing under it. Then we have a year to prepare. All of us. Human and non-human. That's what makes us different from the architects, Helen. We don't face problems alone. Brandon joined them, his earlier nervous energy now focused and purposeful. He'd been working with the enhanced dolphins on propulsion systems. "You're not going to believe this, but the dolphins figured out the quantum drive mechanism we've been stuck on for 3 months. Turns out their 3-dimensional ocean thinking translates almost perfectly to zero-gravity engineering. They see spatial problems in ways our landlocked brains just can't process." The 3 of them stood together on the platform, looking up at a sky that no longer represented isolation but infinite possibility. Humanity had been given a choice, and they'd chosen connection over safety, community over solitude, hope over fear. The alien ship gleamed behind them in the setting sun, its hull displaying a message Rachel had programmed herself. The message broadcast continuously now, sent out to the cosmos in universal mathematical language that any advanced civilization could understand. "We were alone. You don't have to be." Whatever came from the stars in the months and years ahead, whether friends or enemies or something in between, humanity would face it as the architect's greatest success. A species that had learned from their creator's mistakes. A species that chose messy collaboration over perfect isolation. A species that understood their strength came not from being superior or flawless, but from accepting their beautiful, complicated, gloriously imperfect nature. Rachel watched the first stars begin to appear in the darkening sky and felt something she hadn't expected to feel. The future was uncertain. The galaxy was dangerous. Humanity had announced itself to forces they barely understood and couldn't hope to control. But they wouldn't face any of it alone. And they wouldn't face it as conquerors trying to dominate everything they encountered. They'd face it together. Humans and dolphins and crows and all the other species the architects had gifted with potential. They'd face it with humility and hope and the willingness to ask for help when they needed it. And somehow Rachel knew deep in her bones, that was going to make all the difference. The stars shone brighter now, no longer distant and cold, but full of possibility and promise and yes, danger too. But that was okay. Humanity had spent its entire existence facing danger and finding ways to survive and even thrive. This would just be the biggest challenge yet. And they were ready for it. Together.